If I could go back in time 500 years to Tudor London, one of the first buildings I'd want to see would be Old St. Paul's Cathedral. One of the most famous and impressive medieval churches in the world, it stood in its completed form for well over 300 years and survived storms, lightning strikes, and the English Reformation. It was the scene of countless famous events and the final resting place of some very well-known historical figures. Yet virtually all that history was lost on a single catastrophic day in 1666 during the Great Fire of London. Or was it? In today's video from History Calling, we're going to rediscover Old St. Paul's inside and out, from its beginnings to its fiery end, using incredible contemporary pictures and descriptions so that we can see what the Plantagenets, Tudors and Stuarts did, and experience this little piece of lost London for ourselves. We start in the 7th century, during the Christianization of England by Rome, when Pope Gregory the Great sent a missionary bishop to preach to the locals. We have an account of what happened from the chronicler known as the Venerable Bede, who wrote in the 730s, but who used older sources to gather his information. He tells us that, in the year of our Lord 604, Augustine, Archbishop of Britain, ordained Bishop Mellitus to preach to the province of the East Saxons, who are divided from Kent by the River Thames and border on the Eastern Sea. Their metropolis is the city of London, which is situated on the bank of the aforesaid river, and is the mart of many nations resorting to it by sea and land. At that time, Siebert, nephew to Ethelbert through his sister Ricula, reigned over the nation, though he was under subjection to Ethelbert, who, as has been said above, had command over all the peoples of England as far as the Humber. But when the province also received the word of truth by the preaching of Mellitus, King Ethelbert built the Church of St. Paul the Apostle in the city of London, where he and his successors should have their episcopal see. This wooden structure may have replaced a previous building and was built on Ludgate Hill, one of the highest points in the city. It was destroyed in the year 962, however, by the Vikings and rebuilt. The next iteration was also most likely constructed of wood, and it too was destroyed by fire, you may be seeing a pattern here, during the reign of William the Conqueror on the 7th of July, 1087. It was only after that work began on the building we now refer to as Old St. Paul's. The importance of Mellitus was never forgotten though. Old St. Paul's contained a shrine to him, and even now his feast day is still celebrated in the modern church on the 24th of April. The rebuilding began under the oversight of Maurice, Bishop of London, formerly the chaplain and chancellor to King William. Some of the stones were sourced from the remains of a kind of little castle nearby called the Palatine Tower, which had stood by the side of the Fleet River but was at that time being pulled down. Others were brought from Caen. Maurice was responsible for the cathedral being designed in the Norman style, but building work was slow and very little had been done before his death in 1108. Construction continued under his successor, Richard Belmius, and with the support of King Henry I. Belmius, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, died in 1127 though, and in 1135 a further calamity struck when the cathedral was heavily damaged by yet another fire. This delayed its completion even more and meant that its architectural design was altered from the original Norman vision to accommodate newer techniques and preferences, such as lancets in place of round arches. The building's famous steeple was completed in the year 1221, but it was not until 1240 that the church was finally consecrated by Roger Niger, Archbishop of Canterbury. Building work was still not finished though, and there was a further delay when the cathedral was hit by severe storms in 1255, which badly damaged its roof. Still, the builders pressed on, demolishing an existing church called St. Faith in order to make way for part of the new cathedral. The parishioners who had worshipped in the now defunct church were allowed to worship in St. Paul's crypt instead, and today there still remains a chapel there dedicated to St. Faith. The last portion of the building to be constructed was the chapter house to the southwest. When it was done, St. Paul's was finally ready. The year was 1314. Even by medieval standards, St. Paul's Cathedral had been a long time in the making, having taken 227 years to complete. It was a mix of the Norman and early English Gothic styles of architecture, reflecting the length of time it had taken to build and the number of people who had had an input into its design. It was an incredible 104 feet wide, 586 feet long, and the spire's height has variously been given as 489 feet or 460 feet. That later estimate was made by Sir Christopher Wren in the late 17th century. It had been built in the cruciform style, meaning that the building was, broadly speaking, in the shape of a cross. The nave, which we can see here, was known as Paul's Walk and had 12 bays in it with 4 huge pillars to support the central tower. It contained a stunning rose window at the east end of the church, and at some point after the initial construction, flying buttresses were added to support the tower walls. There was an external wall around the churchyard, which was extended in the year 1285 so that it contained gates and posterns which could be closed up at night and prevent the churchyard from continuing to be used for everything from murder to fornication. Within its walls was a cloister, in the centre of which was a burial ground for clerics and important men of London. This area was beautifully decorated by paintings known as the Dance of Death. The cathedral also included an impressive library, and outside its walls was an open-air pulpit known as St. Paul's Cross, the position of which is still marked to this day. The day I was there, though, I arrived in the mid-afternoon because I'd been at Westminster Abbey all morning until after lunch, and so the little courtyard where the golden statue is that marks St. Paul's Cross was closed by the time I got done with the inside of the cathedral, and that's when my photograph is taken from this far back. The original cross was badly damaged when it was struck by lightning in 1382. However, it was rebuilt by a Bishop Kemp and consisted of stone steps, a pulpit made of oak, and even a leaded roof. You can see it here in the year 1620. From this spot, sermons were given and important announcements made. For example, in 1483, a highly controversial sermon was given here by a Friar Ralph Shaw, who spoke against the rights of illegitimate children. It was seen as a clear reference to the children of the recently deceased King Edward IV by his Queen Elizabeth Woodville, and interpreted as a sign of support for the rights of Edward's brother Richard III, who was in the process of deposing his young nephew. This nephew, Edward V, is known to history as one of the princes in the Tower, and I have several videos about his fate and that of his younger brother, which I'll leave linked below for you. Attached to the cathedral was the pre-conquest parish church of St. Gregory by St. Paul. It might sound a little odd to have a parish church connected to a cathedral, but bear in mind that Westminster Abbey has St. Margaret's Church right next to it as well. The cathedral was also full of monuments to important figures, some more famous than others. There were, for instance, the tombs of Kings Seba and Ethelred. The first was the king of the East Saxons and died in either 677 or 695. I found different dates in different sources. Next to him, according to this picture at least, was King Ethelred the Unready, king of the English from 978 to 1013, and again from 1014 until his death in 1016. They are not to be confused with the Siebert and Ethelred mentioned by the Venerable Bede, as you'll recall that they were alive in 604. John of Gaunt, who died in 1399 and was a son of Edward III, plus one of John's wives, Blanche of Lancaster, were buried in the choir next to the high altar, and there were 2 beautiful alabaster effigies of them on top of their tomb, with their hands joined, though this slightly inaccurate drawing of the tomb does not show that. There was also a marble tomb within the choir which memorialised Thomas Ewer, who was the dean for 12 years until his death in 1400, while behind the high altar screen was the shrine of St. Erkenwald, a Saxon prince and Bishop of London who had died in 693. Later would be added the tomb of William Herbert, Earl of Pembroke, a prominent figure in the Tudor courts of Henry VIII, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I, and who was a brother-in-law of Queen Catherine Parr, and therefore also King Henry's brother-in-law. He died in 1569. Sir Nicholas Bacon, another famous Elizabethan and father of Francis, was buried there in 1579, as was Elizabeth's Vice-Chamberlain, Sir Thomas Heneage, who died in 1595 and was buried to the north of the altar. The famed artist Sir Anthony van Dyck was interred there in 1641. Many others were buried in the cathedral too, but we simply don't have time to discuss them all. After its destruction in 1666, however, a few of the memorials were salvaged and can now be seen in the crypt area of the current St. Paul's. The human remains, of course, were, almost without exception, and you will be hearing about one exception later on, cremated or otherwise destroyed by the building's collapse. Had you been able to walk through Old St. Paul's, though, you would have been surrounded by the memorials to the dead in much the same way you are in the modern cathedral or in places like Westminster Abbey. Many very famous events also took place in and outside Old St. Paul's during its existence. It was where Richard II's corpse was shown after his suspicious death, which was probably murder, in 1400. It was also the location of King Henry V's lying in state in 1422, and was where the body of his son, Henry VI, was displayed in 1470. Again, he was probably murdered in the Tower of London. See my videos on how Henry V survived an arrow to the face as a teenager and the death of Henry VI for more information and for some gnarly medieval medicine. I'll leave them linked below for you. St. Paul saw the marriage of Prince Arthur Tudor to Princess Catherine of Aragon in 1501, the lying in state of Arthur's father, Henry VII, in 1509, and it was where Queen Elizabeth came to give thanks to God for the English defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. Other events were more gruesome. In 1283, 2 prisoners escaped from the nearby Tower of London and sought sanctuary in the cathedral. However, the sergeants who were chasing them decapitated one within the building itself and the other in a nearby cemetery. Just as with Thomas Becket, who was murdered in Canterbury Cathedral in 1170, the supposed protection of the church's walls was not always respected. It was also outside the cathedral that those who had been involved in the gunpowder plot of 1606, which had aimed to blow up the Houses of Parliament, were put to death. Other events were, to our eyes, more mundane, including the numerous church councils which were held in the building throughout its existence. Despite its importance to the City of London and England, the physical condition of the cathedral was allowed to deteriorate during the 16th century, as was the level of respect it was shown as a house of God. Although it was not a monastery and so was not dissolved as part of the English Reformation, instead English Bibles were added during the reign of Henry VIII, when the young Edward VI came to the throne and England was placed under the protectorship of the boy's maternal uncle, Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, St. Paul's was stripped of many of its ornaments, including relics like pieces of the skull of Thomas Becket and the head and jaw of King Ethelbert. Also taken or destroyed were the religious images within the church, its crucifix, many of its tombs, and even its alms boxes. You might think that the situation was surely entirely reversed by the accession of Edward's sister, the Catholic Mary I, but in the first year of her marriage to Philip of Spain, the Common Council of London had to pass an act forbidding, and here I quote an 1878 history of the cathedral, the carrying of beer casks or baskets of bread, fish, flesh or fruit, or leading mules or horses through the cathedral under pain of fines and imprisonment. The book continues that the last Tudor, Elizabeth I, quote, also issued a proclamation to a similar effect, forbidding affray, drawing of swords in the church, or shooting with handgun or dag within the church or churchyard, under pain of 2 months' imprisonment. Neither were agreements to be made for the payment of money within the church. Things were obviously pretty bad, but they were about to get much worse. In 1561, complete disaster was only narrowly averted. We have a first-hand account of what happened, printed a week later, which says, on Wednesday, being the 4th day of June, in the year of our Lord 1561, between 1 and 2 o'clock at afternoon, was seen a marvellous great fiery lightning, and immediately ensued a most terrible hideous crack of thunder, such as seldom hath been heard. Divers person, in time of the said tempest, being on the river of Thames, and others being in the field near adjoining to the city, affirmed that they saw a long and a spear-pointed flame of fire, as it were, run through the top of the brooch or spire of Paul's steeple, from the east westward. And some of the parish of St. Martin's, then being in the street, did feel a marvellous strong air or whirlwind, with a smell like brimstone, coming from St. Paul's church, and withal heard a rush of the stones which fell from their steeple into the church. Between 4 and 5 of the clock, a smoke was espied by divers to break out under the boil of the said shaft of Paul's, and namely by Peter Johnson, principal registrar to the Bishop of London, who immediately brought word to the bishop's house. But suddenly after, as it were in a moment, the flame brake forth in a circle like a garland, round about the brush, about 2 yards to the estimation of sight under the boil of the said shaft, and increased in such wise that, within 1/4 of an hour, or little more, the cross and the eagle on the top fell down upon the south cross aisle. The Lord Mayor, the aldermen, the Bishop of London, and even the aforementioned Sir Nicholas Bacon, who was going to end up buried in the cathedral, plus the Lord Treasurer, all considered what to do. Some wanted to shoot down the remnants of the steeple with cannons. However, fortunately, cooler heads prevailed in this case, and it was decided not to do this in case it spread the fire and destroyed the houses of those living nearby. They soon decided to have people climb up the church, create a space in its roof, and hopefully contain the fire within the gap, and by such means preserve at least some of the building. However, before they could enact this plan, quote, the most high part of the highest roof of the church was on fire. Our primary source continues by saying, first, the fall of the cross and eagle fired the south cross aisle, which aisle was first consumed. The beams and brands of the steeple fell down on every side, and fired the other 3 parts, that is to say, the chancel or choir, the north aisle, and the body of the church, so that in 1 hour's space the broch or spire of the steeple was brought down to the battlements, and the most part of the highest roof of the church likewise consumed. Before we get to what happened next, if you're enjoying this content, please show the video some love by tapping the like button, the algorithm likes that sort of thing, and subscribing to my channel with the notification bell switched on. You might also like to check out my website, historycallingofficial.com, where you can sign up to my mailing list and get a free download sharing 5 quick and easy tips to help you spot good history books versus bad. I'd also like to give a quick shout out and thank you to those of you who support the channel by making one-off donations using the thanks button underneath videos, as this is remarkably kind and helps me to keep doing what I'm doing. The heat from the fire was so great that even the church's bells melted, and it took the efforts of many Londoners, over 500 apparently, to contain the fire and save St. Paul's. Thanks to their determination though, and a change in the wind by 10 p.m, quote, the fierceness of the fire was past, the timber being fallen and lying burning upon the vaults of stone. The vaults yet, God be thanked, standing unperished. So as only the timber of the whole church was consumed, and the lead molten, saving the most part of the 2 aisles of the choir and a piece of the north aisle and another small piece of the south aisle in the body of the church. Notwithstanding all which, it pleased the merciful God in his wrath to remember his mercy, and to include the harm of this most fierce and terrible fire within the walls of this one church, not extending any part of his wrath in this fire upon the rest of the city, which to all reason and sense of man was subject to utter destruction. For in the whole city without the church no stick was kindled surely. This final paragraph about the rest of the city being mercifully spared while St. Paul's burnt is particularly ironic when we consider what would happen to London barely a century later in 1666, but we'll come to that in a few minutes. The lightning strike and subsequent fire were blamed by the contemporary populace on numerous factors. Some thought, as the author of our primary source says, that it was a sign of God's displeasure with Londoners for their irreligious ways, which included not respecting the church by walking, jangling, brawling, fighting, bargaining, etc., namely in sermon and service time, within the said church, and particularly the nave. He also said that some blamed it on, quote, negligence of plumbers, though in fact no plumbers had worked in the church for 6 months prior. Just like today, conspiracy theories were rife, and, quote, Others suspect that it was done by some wicked practice of wildfire or gunpowder, but no just suspicions thereof by any examination can be found hitherto. Some suspect conjurers and sorcerers, whereof there is also no great likelihood, and if it had been brought that way, yet could not the devil have done it without God's permission, and to some purpose of his unsearchable judgments. The steeple was never rebuilt, and its loss allows us to date images of old St. Paul's. If you can see the steeple, the image is pre-1561, or at least it's intended to represent a time before 1561. If not, it's post. There aren't very many steeple images though, so I'm afraid I have to rely more on non-steeple images on this video, and I hope you'll forgive the occasional inaccuracy as a result of this. This iconic part of the church may not have been replaced, but the roof was repaired, only for it to be discovered in the Stuart period that the work had been rather shoddy, and that the cathedral was now starting to come apart at the seams. Money was therefore gathered to undertake repairs, and we have an example of one fundraising letter written by William Laud, Bishop of London, future Archbishop of Canterbury, and a man who was ultimately executed by the parliamentarians in 1645. This was composed on the 30th of September 1632 and addressed to the barber surgeons of London. It said, "After my very hearty commendations, you cannot but take notice of His Majesty's, that's Charles I, most honest and pious intention for the repair of the decay of St. Paul's Church here in London, being the mother church of this city and diocese, and the great cathedral of this kingdom. A great dishonour it is, not only to this city, but to the whole state, to see that ancient and goodly pile of building so decayed as it is. But it will be a far greater if care should not be taken to prevent the fall of it into ruin. And it would be no less disgrace to religion, happily established in this kingdom, if it should have so little power over the minds of men as not to prevail with them to keep those eminent places of God's service in due and decent repair, which their forefathers built in times, by their own confession, not so full of the knowledge of God's truth as this present age is. I am not ignorant how many worthy works have been done of late in and about this city towards the building and repairing of churches, which makes me hope that every man's purse will open to this great and necessary work, according to God's blessing upon him, so much tending to the service of God and the honour of this nation. The general body of this city have done very worthily in their bounty already, also the Lord Mayor, aldermen, and sheriffs severally, for their own persons. These are therefore, according to their examples, heartily to pray and desire you, the Master Warden and other assistants of the worthy company of barber surgeons, to contribute out of your public stock to the work aforesaid, what you out of your charity and devotion shall think fit, and to pay the sum resolved on by you into the Chamber of London at or before Our Lady Day next, praying you that I may receive by any servant of your company a note what the sum is which you resolve to give. And for this charity of yours, whatever it shall prove to be, I shall not only give you hearty thanks, but be as ready to serve you and every of you as you are to serve God and His Church. So, not doubting of your love and forwarding to this great work, I leave you to the grace of God, and shall so rest." This letter produced a commitment of £10 a year, and together with many other donations, work was able to commence under the oversight of architect Inigo Jones. I never know if that's Inigo or Inigo. It's one of those names I've seen written down many times, but I've never actually had to say it out loud. Between 1632 and 1642, he updated the nave and transept and redesigned the west front, switching it from the Gothic style to the classical, which did create a bit of a mishmash, but on the bright side, that mishmash wasn't destined to last for very long. During the civil wars and interregnum of the 1640s and 1650s, the work was halted. The subscription money raised was seized by the parliamentarians, and St. Paul's was badly mistreated. In taking off the scaffolding, which was sold to pay arrears of military salaries, part of the south transept was brought down, while the copes in the church, and that means a long cloak worn by a priest or bishop, were burnt to get the gold out of them. I assume this means they had gold thread in them. The silver vessels were sold to fund the purchase of artillery for Oliver Cromwell, the graves were desecrated, the choir was transformed into a military barracks, the pulpit and cross destroyed, and the dragoons lodging in the buildings in 1651 had to be ordered not to play the game nine pins from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. because the noise they were making was bothering the neighbours. Yet in the midst of all this tumult, this was also the decade from which the best images we have of the exterior and interior of the cathedral date, having been drawn by Czech artist Wenceslaus Hollar for the author William Dugdale in order to illustrate his 1658 book, The History of St. Paul's Cathedral in London from its foundation until these times. If we didn't have these images, which I've been using throughout this video, we'd have hardly anything to go on, particularly for the interior of the building. Hollar even did some drawings of the cathedral with its steeple, which he would never have seen, but he presumably had older works and descriptions to guide him. Of course, they can't show us exactly what St. Paul's looked like in earlier centuries, but still they are a truly invaluable resource, and they have been used to help with a website called the Virtual St. Paul's Project, which I'll link below for you, and which shows amazing digital reconstructions of the lost building. It's well worth a look if you're interested in this topic. The monarchy was restored in 1660 with the return of Charles II, and repair works had been restarted at St. Paul's when suddenly everything Hollar and all those who had seen the cathedral in the 350 years prior was destroyed. The trouble started in the early hours of Sunday the 2nd of September 1666 at a baker's house on Pudding Lane owned by a Mr. Farriner, where a fire took hold and led to the death of his serving girl who was too afraid to jump to the neighbour's house. It quickly took hold and swept through the city over the next 3 days. I'm not going to get into a detailed discussion of it here, but on my Patreon site, where I provide extras like early access to ad-free videos and bonus podcasts, I have a bonus video about the fire which everyone, no matter which paid tier they're on, can access. So if you want to know more about it, the lowest tier is only $2 a month, and that will also give you access to my archive of posts for that tier. For this video though, I want to focus specifically on how the fire affected St. Paul's. At first it seemed like the cathedral would be spared by the flames, and panicked citizens began depositing their goods in the building to protect them. But the blaze was poorly managed at the outset by the Mayor of London, who delayed pulling down houses to create fire breaks, one of the few really effective firefighting techniques of the period for large conflagrations, and so it spread. On Tuesday the 4th of September, it reached this medieval cathedral, which had been standing in various degrees of completion for nearly 600 years. Diarist John Evelyn wrote on the 3rd of September that, "I went and saw the whole south part of the city burning from Cheapside to the Thames and all along Cornhill, for it likewise kindled back against the wind as well as forward. Tower Street, Fenchurch Street, Gracious Street, and so along to Baynard's Castle, and was now taking hold of St. Paul's Church, to which the scaffolds contributed exceedingly." He returned on the 7th and recorded that, "I was infinitely concerned to find that goodly church St. Paul's now a sad ruin, and that beautiful portico, for structure comparable to any in Europe, as not long before repaired by the late king, now rent in pieces, flakes of vast stone split asunder, and nothing now remaining entire but the inscription in the architecture showing by whom it was built, which had not one letter of it defaced. It was astonishing to see what immense stones the heat had in a manner calcined, so that all the ornaments, columns, friezes, capitals, and projectures of massive Portland stone flew off, even to the very roof, where a sheet of lead covering a great space, no less than 60 acres by measure, was totally melted. The ruins of the vaulted roof, falling, broke into St. Faith's, which being filled with the magazines of books belonging to the stationers and carried thither for safety, they were all consumed, burning for a week following." Side note, it's interesting that Evelyn says this. It would suggest that this diary entry was either not really written up on the 7th of September, or that he went back and added that line in. It is also observable that the lead over the altar at the east end was untouched, and among the divers monuments, the body of one bishop remained entire. Remember I told you you'd be hearing about an exception to the cremated or destroyed rule? Well, this is it. Thus lay in ashes that most venerable church, one of the most ancient pieces of early piety in the Christian world. His fellow diarist Samuel Pepys saw the ruins on the same day and bemoaned the, quote, miserable sight of Paul's church, with all the roof fallen, and the body of the choir fallen into St. Faith's. St. Paul's, as everyone had known it, was gone, reduced to a smouldering ruin which it was quickly decided could not possibly be salvaged. It was a heartbreaking turn of events, with the closest modern comparison being the fire at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris in 2019, though thanks to modern firefighting techniques, the destruction there was not so devastating. Just like in Paris, a decision was quickly taken to rebuild, and as most of you will know, architect Sir Christopher Wren, who had already been assisting with the repairs to the old cathedral, was now hired to design a new St. Paul's. This building rose from the ashes of the old to be completed in December 1711. It stands today on almost exactly the same location as its predecessor, and that brings us very nicely to our question of the week, which is, which building do you prefer the look of, old or new St. Paul's? Let me know below, and for more architectural history, try my video on Buckingham Palace next. If you're in the mood for something else though, might I suggest one of these instead? Whatever you choose, please enjoy, and until next time, keep learning.